What's up, designers? Welcome back to the studio. So I want to pick up with our cut collage project. In a previous tutorial we were doing just work with magazines and glue, right? And kind of thinking about background, subject, and foreground. And if there was any piece that you were missing, so you could sort of substitute with drawing. So in the case that in the example that I was working on in class, I had this background of the sky, these three surfer dudes which got stripped off their surfboards and turned into crazy trapeze artists. And then because I didn't really have an object, I hand drew in, that's actually paint and Sharpie marker, the sort of trapeze bar thing. I don't even really know what to call those things. But anyway, this was sort of a condensed, fast, kind of quick way of working with, images that were cut out of magazines. You're responding to color, design, maybe you're actually responding to content or context, right? You're actually using the people as people, using the birds as birds, as sort of a literal interpretation of the work. But if you have, extras of all those cutouts, that's what maybe we're going to pick up today. We're going to do some more work. We're going to make this whole collage experiment a little bit more complex. We're not just going to be working with images and pasting. We're going to be working with sort of the removal and addition of imagery, modification of original intent, and the possibility, right, of bringing drawing back in, always bringing drawing and design back into it. So this is going to take a little bit more forethought, and you're going to be looking for something like a food container or food box. These cereal boxes are great because they're usually covered in ridiculous illustrations or silly photographs or something. So make sure that you finish that one off, get rid of the bag, and we'll flatten out the boxes. In this case, I've got a box, right, that has a really big goofy photograph on the back that's already sort of isolated, but the scale is really exaggerated, and I just find it sort of silly. And so I'm thinking I may work with the back of this box. Working with these cardboard food boxes is really nice because they're thick enough, right? They're sort of like a 2 or 3 ply chipboard that they'll stand up to some of our acrylic paint that we'll use. But then they'll also, there's usually a good amount of stuff to use on the box. You may actually kind of reinterpret text using photographic imagery, using character designs, using the kind of like marketing strangeness, like extra large size, 15% more cereal, whatever that means. Before we actually kind of get to work on this, let me just show you a couple quick examples from previous semesters of work. I did a couple of silly versions of this using some Quaker Oats. Now in this example, I just worked with text and the sort of negative space or the silhouette of the kind of classic icon of the Quaker Oats brand, right? And so this sort of old school Quaker who has this bar of text underneath him, but I've removed that all and I'm using him as a frame, right? So one of the things we'll think about, or we'll kind of put on the table for thinking through this is not positive but negative space, how you might make use of the negative space inside of your design. And then also in this one I was using text. There's so much text just to kind of sell me cereal. It's kind of ridiculous. And so one of the most interesting things I think a designer can do with text is use it in a non-literal way, using text as image. And so that's what this one was sort of playing with. These other two are being a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, or a little bit more literal with some of the imagery. Because of the way that cereal boxes are printed, there's a fairly limited color print profile. So the blue of this old school Quaker's jacket is exactly the same blue as these blueberries. He really just sort of feels like he belongs in the bowl, so I kind of dunked him down in there by fitting him, by carefully cutting around his edges and sort of tucking him behind some of those giant Quaker squares. And then this last one is a little bit more tongue-in-cheeky too, about the marketing and distribution of food and the kind of labeling of it. So I've actually carefully cut out squares of barcodes found somewhere else on the box and tucked them in. Now these are not necessarily like excellent examples that I'm trying to get you to emulate, but I am trying to give you a couple of ideas of where we're headed. We're going to use white paint as an act of isolation to just sort of cut out your design, and then we're going to be bringing in other imagery or drawings to the table. So if you have extra, extra cutouts from the previous projects, hang on to those. There's a very good chance we may kind of use them. As you're kind of digging around looking for a good food box, start to get your sort of ideas running already, and it may actually be handy to sort of think about 2 or 3 steps ahead of this process. I'm sort of thinking about the kind of obscenely large Cheerio on the back here with these giant flakes, and I could reimagine these flakes as something else. It's kind of got this, land of chew and swallow, sort of like immense food falling from the sky thing. I might exaggerate the scale. And they got this opening, right? This opening feels almost geographic or like geological, right? It feels like something I could climb through or drive through. So I'm imagining, if I could find the right imagery or just draw the right imagery in. It also, it's like glistening with honey or something. It looks soaking wet, so I'm imagining it, possibly being underwater. Each one of these ideas, each one of these concepts could take me in a totally different direction. As I start to work with it, I'll narrow my focus down more and more and more and focus on one sort of specific iteration of it. So let's get to do some painting. Now to get this going, let's flatten the box out. That way you're not super concerned about the box walking away from you. And if you want to break the seam, all these boxes are sort of glued together with kind of a low-tack glue on the edge. This way I can sort of see what I'm working with. I have a little bit better access, and it's a nice flat object here. I'll end up doing my trimming off way down the road. Right now all I wanted it is sort of flat. I've really decided, sort of firmed up my idea that I'm just going to be working with this Cheerio. So my very first step would be an active isolation and remove, using white paint, sort of an area around this giant Cheerio. To do that, find your white acrylic paint. It should be on a film canister here. The acrylic paint that's in this tube, it's the sort of paint that will stain everything. It's a permanent water-based paint, so if it's on your hands, it'll wash off, but if it gets in your clothes or if it gets on a tabletop or something else that's absorbent, it's going to stay there forever. Now that includes your paintbrushes, right? So it's not a bad idea to have a little bit of water around and a towel in case you need to step away from your painting for a minute. Never leave a paintbrush with acrylic paint sitting in it for more than 5 minutes or so. It'll start to gum up, and then after it gets gummy, it starts to kind of become solid plastic. The brush that we'll use first is this sort of long-handled green brush that's in your kit. This is going to be this will be your utility brush. It'll just kind of block out the large areas around the outside. When it comes to doing some detail work, maybe kind of pushing that paint right up to the edge of objects and doing a really careful cut, this blue-handled brush that's in your watercolor kit is probably not a bad bet. It has a synthetic bristle that'll still stand up to the abuse of the water-based acrylics. So this paint is pretty thick, but you will probably still need a couple of coats. I'm going to put down my sort of splash coat, which is really just going to start to knock down my background and helps me visually start to think through this process. Don't get too frustrated if the sort of opacity of the paint isn't quite thick enough for you yet. A couple of layers and you won't see anything of the original design in the background. as I'm getting closer and closer to the edges of my work, I'm slowing down, and I'm not using that choppy brush stroke anymore, but I'm using sort of a careful brush stroke, just kind of running those bristles right along the outer edges of my piece. I might not even need anything smaller than this brush unless I'm really trying to get up close. But go ahead and cut out whatever it is that you're working with, and then you're gonna have to let it sit for a little bit and let this paint set up. It will probably get gummy in about 5 or 10 minutes, and it will be totally dry in probably 20-25 minutes, depending on where you are and how warm it is in that room. As it starts to dry, be really mindful of that brush. Do not leave this brush with paint in it. It will get ruined, and then you won't be able to kind of come back and do your second or third coats. If you need to get in there and do some really detailed work, grab that teeny tiny brush, load the tip with paint. Don't get any paint on the ferrule. The ferrule is the silver part. No point in getting paint there. You're just kind of working paint right in the bristles and pulling it right along the edges. So I've pretty much got my first coat laid down. There's a lot of transparency here, and I've sort of pulled the background away from that Cheerio wide enough that I've got a lot of room to play with my designs. I don't know exactly where I'm going yet. I'm not sure if I need all that white space at the bottom or if not. So start with a lot, and then as your idea refines, you can kind of cut off what you don't need later. I'm gonna, give this thing 20 minutes or so to dry, and I'll catch up with you guys in the studio tomorrow. Don't forget to wash your brushes out, and then, do a couple of quick sketches on the side to see, where your ideas might take you. I'll see you guys in the studio tomorrow.